It's Monday, the 9th of December 2024. Today, Ted Burtt is sharing his story about his mentor and friend, the late Mr. William Bill Ratcliff, who served in the First and Second World Wars. His name and years of service appear on the honour board in the Lower Barrington Community Hall. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you. Now, I met Bill later in his life when I was only a teenager. He was at the stage of retiring from the workforce, and he was going to the same church as I was at the time. And then we started up a boys' brigade group in Devonport, and he became the main chief officer of the boys' brigade in Devonport. I spent a fair bit of time with Bill over quite a number of years prior to getting married. One of his great loves when he retired, or before he retired, was fishing. And he just loved to fish. He would never eat them or give them away, but he just loved to catch them. And he was quite good at it too. I think he had someone on his side that helped him a fair bit. And he would con people into taking him fishing because he didn't have a car. So he would say to you, "What are you doing next week?" "We'll go fishing." "All right, Pop, we'll go fishing." His common name was Pop in those days. So that was my introduction to Bill. And of course, during those trips and at other times when we were doing different things, he would tell me stories, particularly of his time in the army during both the First and the Second World War. He spent a fair bit of time in France during the First World War as a second lieutenant in the army, and told me many stories about the things that they used to get up to because he was living a lot of his time with a French family, and remembered them fondly and the things that they used to do, and particularly taking him out into the swamps frog hunting was one of his great exploits. And I sort of screwed up my nose when he told me the story. But he said, "Oh, they were lovely." He said, "They were just like chicken." And I said, "Well, that's good, Pop. You can have them. I don't think I'll worry." And many stories like that. He had a great sense of humour. And he would tell me lots of funny stories about both the First World War. And then during the Second World War, of course, he was he was in charge of Brighton Army Camp during the Second World War, where all our servicemen were set out from Tasmania. They all went out through Brighton Army Camp, and he was in charge of Brighton during the Second World War. And many stories, of course, came out of his time at Brighton as well, things they used to get up to, and what they used to do of a Saturday night with the men when they'd take them up to the pub, and church parades of a Sunday, and all those sorts of things that they used to do. And some of the funny stories that came out of that I still remember with great humour. Pop telling me the story, getting quite excited. So that was sort of a bit of a background of Bill, and a great man, a wonderful man, and a great faith. He had a great Christian faith, and he was a much loved person. After coming out of the army, he then actually, along with a partner, started up what was the Devon Cordial Factory. It was down on Formby Road, where Tinder Window is these days, I think it's called. But that's where the factory was at the time. Later became Walsh's Electroplating Works. And it was funny because Les Walsh went to the same church as we did too, so he was carrying on another business in the same premises that Pop started off with his partner in the Devon Cordial Factory. He eventually sold it, much to his disappointment, because during the pre-war or after the war days, things were still on rations, and of course one of the things that was on rations was sugar, along with a lot of other household products. And of course they had quite a bit of sugar, as they needed to make the cordial, and his partner was selling the sugar on the side, much to Pop's horror. And Pop found out about it eventually, and so they parted company, and he eventually sold the cordial factory. But he said to me, I wish I had 3 or 4 young fellas like you around. He said we would have done really, really well. So he was, that was probably a little bit of a disappointment to him. And of course that factory eventually moved up to Don Road, where the big car yard is these days, and that was then became the Tee-Up Cordial Factory, but it was originally started as the Devon Cordial Factory by Pop after the Second World War. Latter years he was the gateman, or the gatekeeper out at the Ovaltine factory was the last employment situation that he was involved in, and he used to ride his little Bantam BSA motorbike back and forth to work, was his only mode of transport. A bit hard to go fishing on that with somebody else. But that was his last job before he completely retired from the workforce. Lived in Steel Street himself, along with his wife, lovely wife, and 2 children, Coralie and Wilbur. Wilbur spent most of his life in Canberra working for the government in quite a high position. And I remember he was a member of high up in the Gideon Society, and when he retired they actually gave him a Pro Heart painting as his retirement present. But I never got to know Wilbur because he was never here, he was away. But Coralie lived in Devonport and I did meet her a few times, so that's about as much of the background as I can think of.
How important was it for you to have a role model and mentor in your younger years?
Well, yes, in those days it was pretty important. We looked up to certain people, and Pop was one of those fellas that was just a terrific guy to all the young people, not just me, but to all the young people. He was a real example of a man who was strong in his beliefs and fair and humorous, and always had really good advice to give anybody at the time. It was great. Yeah. We all loved him. He was just one of those gems of a fella.
Well, thank you, Ted.